Well, as Brian said, my name is Joe Rutherford, and I do want to say, Linda, it's going to be a tough act to follow. I didn't even know this forum existed, frankly, until Evan Brownstein gave me a call this weekend and said, Joe, we had planned to slate you in this in the future, but what are you doing Tuesday morning? And can you speak? So from preparations, I'll be able to contrast that versus shooting from the hip, which is my style anyhow. So I said, my name is Joe Rutherford. What I do want to say is that I came to Tampa in 1991. When we moved here, our kids were 2 and 7. They both since graduated from USF, and they work in the general area. So they consider themselves Floridians. And my wife and I moved here from Cleveland, Ohio. And I know some of you are already thinking, that's not a Cleveland, Ohio accent. I'm originally from Tennessee, and you'll hear that from time to time. But I'm currently the CEO of Gracepoint. Some of you have heard of Gracepoint. Others of you may have heard of MHC, or Mental Health Care, as the agency was branded for a number of years. A little history on the organization. MHC was originally called the Child Guidance Center, and it was founded in 1949 in Tampa. Several ladies from the Junior League saw that there is a need for children's services in the Tampa Bay area, and in fact, our current board chair, Guy King, who a number of you know, it turns out just by coincidence, we found this out later, his mother was one of 3 of the women who really pushed the initiative back in 1949 to found this organization. So I like to think that even though our agency has changed names several times over the years, it genuinely is part of the fabric of the Tampa Bay area. In some general history, just on mental health itself. Mental health services, community mental health really came into the mainstay 1961, I believe it was, is when Kennedy signed the deinstitutionalization bill to get people out of the institutions and to provide a treatment in the actual communities. And so it was at that time when a lot of agencies that are similar to Gracepoint really kind of came into being, even though we preceded that by a number of years. And the industry for a number of years was really siloed, I think is the best term to use that. People had to come to you based on this outdated term, which is thankfully now gone, which we called catchment areas. So depending on your zip code, you would have to go to certain organizations. Of course, everything now has moved over towards consumer choice. But back in the day, there was really no competition. As long as you had good outcomes, good documentation, and you're able to survive okay. And of course, we are a large nonprofit organization. Today, Gracepoint, our annual budget is $36 million. We have about 600 employees. But what has shifted over the years, and it's a very positive shift, is that the catchment areas are gone, consumer choice is embraced, but more importantly, is the fact that the concept of integrated care has become so important. The days of, if you needed mental health or counseling services, you'd go to one area. If you needed substance abuse services, you'd go somewhere else. And then medical was somewhere else. And now everything, as many folks in here do know, everything is really talking about treating the whole person. And so when I was interviewed for my job with the board of directors, and I told them, I said, our challenge is to really transform this company to what we need to be for the company of the future. The number one thing really is to reduce the stigma of receiving mental health services. The CDC has said that 1 out of 4 people at some time in their lives will have a diagnosable mental illness. And before you guys start counting how many people are in your row, the thing I'd want to clarify on that is that's going to be more of an acute mental illness. Say it could be a depression or an anxiety. Brian, he's already seen if you're number 5 down the row, right? Okay, right. And because of HIPAA, I couldn't say if you were or were not. So, but again, it could be a short-lived anxiety or depression, but it's 1 out of 4. 1 out of 17 individuals have what they call an SPMI, or a serious and persistent mental illness. And those are the more common schizophrenias, the bipolar disorders, where someone may be hospitalized in and out, maybe for their whole lives and need management. And when you think of the stigma, there's no other disease that has that level of occurrence. I spoke to someone earlier this morning. I say, I've always been struck with how you come to these type of events, And as we have our dialogue in the back of the room, people will say commonly, oh, I was diagnosed with high blood pressure. I'm having a biopsy. We think there could be a cancer. So those are the type of things that people will commonly discuss and get advice from one another. But the more common disease of mental illness, I'm always struck with, I'm a member of the Rotary Club. I live up in New Tampa. And for those of you who live south of Kennedy, yes, there is life on the north side. But I'll go to events, and people will pull me off to the side, and they'll say, Joe, you work in that mental illness industry, don't you? I said, well, yeah, we do. I said, who do I talk to? Our next door neighbor's son, we don't know, but it's potentially suicidal. Or my spouse's parents died 2 years ago. She still cries 4 hours a day. Or I'm feeling it's hard for me to get out of bed to go to work anymore. But because of that stigma, something that is now a science. We're not talking about the science that we had 40 years ago. The analogy I use is we've moved from the days and the facilities of the movie of the scene One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to actual treatable, preventable disease management. But with that being said, I knew that we had to help reduce that stigma. We had to move the name of our organization from mental health care, which wasn't too inviting of a name of a business, to something that better represents what we do. In fact, the company that Evan Brownthing was working with at the time, Evan was one of our lead consultants, and we had to go through a rebranding process, a very formal kind of a process where we interviewed our employees, our stakeholders, the patients that we saw. And then we came up with the name Gracepoint, because people will still ask me, are you guys a church? Because you see grace quite often in churches. And the thing we realize is, if you look at the definition of grace, one of the definitions is to confer honor or dignity upon. And we realize so many people that we treat in our industry have never had that in their lives before. And the other part about grace is the fact that, unlike a lot of other companies, we don't have inventory or machinery. We're not a hospital with $1 million MRI machine to pay off. Instead, our agency is really defined by our staff. So our staff's experience, their interactions, their educational training, how they interact with the patients that we end up seeing, that's what really defines the grace as a part of Gracepoint. We don't have the inventory that defines us or the services other than our staff's interaction with the people that we end up serving. And the point, part of Gracepoint, is that we realize, unlike a lot of other medical care, sometimes in our disease management, we don't really cure the person in mental illness. Now, some of you in here that may work in that field or as professors in psychology would disagree with me. But what we do know is that some people may come to us and we treat them for a short period of time. They get on the right medications, and we may never see them again, or maybe they come in quarterly for medication management. There are other people who are really significantly mentally ill, and maybe they're Baker acted as frequently as 2 or 3 times a month in a continual crisis. But if we engage those people correctly, follow them in their treatment to encourage them to take their medications and stay engaged in treatment, the person that might be depressed, we may never see them again after 6, 12 months of work with that individual. Someone with a serious mental illness, maybe eventually down the road, they're only Baker acted twice a year instead of 3 times a month. And some people say, well, they're still being Baker acted twice a year. They're not cured. And we say, yes, but if we take a look at where they were when we engage that person to where they are today, they have made it to a better place or a better point in their lives. So the point is really more of a longitudinal type of an analogy. So the grace and the point are our staff and working with people to get them to a better place where they were in their lives. Business-wise, it's a very challenging business. We are a large nonprofit. And a lot of people who work in the for-profit industry, which is probably, I would say, the majority of folks in this room, will say, well, gee, it must be nice to work in a nonprofit. You don't have to worry about money. And I'll say, well, nonprofit is a tax designation. It's not a business model. We look at our productivity. About a third of our budget does come from the state, a contractor with DCF. And we have to be very politically involved. We always have to keep our issues in front of the legislators. And so I'm often in Tallahassee to show on our outcomes and improvements. And of course, what they want to hear is, how many jobs are you going to create if you get any of the tax dollars, and how much are you saving the state money? And it's a challenge. We have winners and losers every year as we do that. Thank you. And but the challenge of to secure and maintain those state funding, while at the same time another large portion of our dollars comes from sources that you'd expect, such as Medicaid. And the interesting thing there is that Medicaid rates have not been increased in nearly 2 decades on the mental health side. And so any of you in your business say, okay, how can I run my business today if I was still charging the same amount today as I was charging 20 years ago? Whereas we have 600 staff who, we have, of course, the full benefits package, and we know health insurance and benefits usually has a slight increase annually and to make everything balance out. I think where we've been really successful, though, is that we have a very entrepreneurial-minded board, led by Guy King, a number of other board members that many in here would know, Doug Arthur, John Grandoff, and a number of folks. And so we've had to be innovative. And so what we've been doing now, our focus is to move more towards actual medical integration. We work closely with several of the hospital systems, Tampa Family, which is a large FQHC. We have them now co-located on our campus. But the programs that we have are still a wide spectrum. So we are the Baker Act receiving facility for Hillsborough County. And we can't turn anyone away, both funded and unfunded, but we have 60 adult beds. And Baker Act receiving facility, it shocks people when they hear the volume. We have about 1,000 people a month come through central receiving to be evaluated for a potential Baker Act. Not all those are, in fact, Baker Acted. Maybe about 60% are. But if you think of it, we're actually the psychiatric emergency room for Hillsborough County. We have another 28 children's Baker Act beds. We recently doubled that from 14 to 28 beds. And it's a shame that you even have to have that, frankly, but it usually stays full. Another 28 forensic beds. So we have 116 licensed, so we're hospital beds, so we're a small hospital. But we also have outpatient services. We have children's programs. We have staff going into the schools. We have a full continuum. And I think the distinguishing factor, what's so important to keep in mind between an agency such as ours and others that might sell hospital beds. A lot of hospitals such as Baycare and HCA have psych beds, and that's important that they have those. We need that capacity. But as a full continuum, that means when we discharge someone, we do the things that no one else would do to keep a person safe and healthy and in the community. If they need case management services, if they need housing services, ongoing treatment to get that person engaged. Gracepoint has about another 315 housing units between HUD and low-income housing. What I'm really proud of the organization, too, is that our treatment is second to none. You say, okay, you guys are right off of Hillsborough Avenue, Hillsborough and 22nd. Not the most prestigious address, but yet our psychiatrists, we have nearly 40 psychiatrists, 20 of which are full-time employees, another 20 we do resident placements through USF and other arrangements that we have, 50 or 60 licensed clinicians. And what I'm proud of is I'll get calls from some of my board members. They'll say, listen, my next door neighbor wants to get in and see a private psychiatrist. Money is no object, but it's going to be 3 or 4 months before they can see there. And we've moved our model to same-day service. If a person's willing to come in and wait a few hours or a 2-week appointment, no one's getting anyone in front of a psychiatrist or getting them in treatment as quickly as we are as a community nonprofit. The final thing I'll say, because I think we'll have some roundtable discussion time too, because on my last 60 seconds I'll say is, business-wise, I think what's so critical for us, because we have such a diversity of programs, is to have the correct team. I probably have 2 people out of 12 on my senior management team that were there when I first came to Gracepoint about 8 years ago. And the main thing that I look for when we hire our top leaders are, can we work as a team spirit? We don't need people that have sort of a gotcha mentality or people who are working towards trying to carve out a larger share of the pie for themselves. And I would rather hire someone that has that team mentality, that has that empathy and the passion to work together, to help solve problems as a group, rather than, I would hire that person over someone that may have a bit more of a technical knowledge, because in my opinion, technical knowledge can always be obtained. But that team mentality, someone with the real empathy and the passion for your business, be it mental health, be it the fire prevention, be it for the restaurant industry, I think that the number one thing that I would look for, people who will go that extra mile for the mission of your organization. Because with that, as you have adversity, as we all will, and it's always going to come and go, you're going to have people that you can depend on that is going to roll up their sleeves and make the agency successful. So I'll conclude with that.